My name is Elizabeth Martina Bishop, and the Martina is there because I would never hope to emulate Elizabeth Bishop, the Canadian poet laureate who died in 1964. I'd like to begin this reading with a poem from the selection Camille's Return. And this portrait has an interesting background because it was actually of an Apache woman who is known in the 1860s. I doubt her name was Camille. I really don't know her name. And the portrait was done by Amy Stein. When Esmeralda Lopez began singing country and western songs in the Seven Arrows Bar, that was, you got that right, in Taos, New Mexico, she noticed she lagged behind on mortgage payments. The price of coal in Black Mesa gave the Hopis less than the price of a bottle of pop per ton. And meanwhile, bird baths and houses were notoriously overpriced. As faint stars clustered and blossomed and bloomed overhead, hadn't Esmeralda realized locusts had already destroyed most of the surrounding villages? What robs an auctioneer of his dignity? A sonnet? Unearned tax credits? An unrelenting fusillade of demons in a dream? I heard from someone last week the shaking tent ceremony was making a comeback. Perhaps it's global warming causes Mother Skunk to deploy her stripes down the middle of the road. You know those poems that never seem to have an ending, and you know those ceremonies you might attend that never seem to end, a never-ending ceremony, some kind or other. You might have attended one once. And this poem is called Aftermath. It was written after a wedding. It seemed to have no ending. The party went on for days and nights and weeks. This was an occasion that seemed like a sacrilege. Something was missing. No kidding. Was this supposed to be a shotgun wedding? Or was it a secret? No one knew for sure if the bride was 5 months pregnant. The veil allowed all kinds of things. At the time those pictures were taken, perhaps she was beginning to show, or perhaps not. And as for you, my daughter, when exactly were you taken ill? Weren't you the one baptized on the run? And your dad, where was he? Taking in a movie? Eating popcorn? Or shooting clay pigeons, maybe? This is for a different collection. This is called Honoring the Elders. And I'm not sure who the elder is on the cover, but I figure he might come from somewhere in Mother Earth, in the regions no one has yet known fully or recognized. And this is called Sadie's School for the Blind. I got on a bus, and one time a lady said she's going to the School for the Blind, She was on a bus and I started talking with her, and then this poem got born that way. Sadie lights a candle. She imagines Helen Keller visited her all day one day. All her dreams involved the School for the Blind. You know, the Perkins Institute. She purses her lips and imagines she can see the cosmic truth. She flips over the news of her little son. Her little son can read, and he speaks in 4 languages, but she can only read 1. She eats lamb from a wooden plate. She walks over to her dresser. She walks over to the stove. She walks over to the dresser and pulls out a tortoiseshell comb that was her mother's mother's. Or was it her father's mother's? She swims to the tune of Fortunate Elements in her dreaming when she is no longer blind. Now she takes up her knitting needles. She puts them down. She takes them up. She harnesses rivers of silk. She frowns over steaming cups of coffee. Take me back, she cries to the fire whose flames are etched in silver and in gold. And she recounts this story. She tells this story to herself about Spider Woman, White Buffalo Woman, and the bison. She stops. She starts telling the story. She looks through the window as she watches the hawks. Marielle, her half-sister, tells her she might have been a hawk in her past life. She would have passed her off as one, as a shadow leaping over the grass that dances over a cornfield that will not last. The wind dances, the wheat rises and falls. Marielle tells her what she wants to hear and whispers in her ear. Yes, she says she's been a hawk all her life, and on Sundays she wears a ragged green dress and goes to church and takes off the leaves and the wings of her past life. She kneels on pews she knows that never existed. She swears eyeless rivers will never dry up, not now. Sadie lists a dozen craters in the moon. She lists the lifelines in her hands. She never makes a mistake with any Braille words. She always prays when she drives her motor car in her dreams. Then, at that time, she begins to pray for everyone in the village. And then, you know what she does? She forgets herself completely. This is from meditation. And of course, the heron is standing there. One time, the reason why the heron ended up on the cover of this book is one time I was out shopping in Boulder, and I came back from shopping, was carrying a couple of students in the car, and then noticed this blue heron came and landed on the car, and it refused to leave. So we got home and we did the mile from the shopping trip home, and the blue heron was still in the car. And then we opened the back of the car and took out the shopping, and the blue heron was still in the car. So I thought he should end up as a title, as a meditation sequence, because he refused to leave the car. And then when I was inside my log cabin, then he flew off later. And so this poem is kind of about the heron, in a way, as a spirit of a native. And this poem is called Now I'm in Love with a Ghost. Now I'm in love with the idea of a ghost. The folded Indian blanket, the red rocks in the background, Is this the end of a romance when you flew off from the car? How could you leave? How could you wait to leave till I was safely ensconced in my log cabin house? Now I have to talk to the entire world about my memory of you and how I am lost without you. If I write in prose, people say I am unfocused, yet people believe. If I write in poems, people disbelieve. No one believes about the talk story, about the fact that now I'm in love with a ghost of blue feathers on a golden pond. I write deep into the night to make sense of this mystery. Little poems about my awakening, about my believing in you. Now I am in love with a ghost. I keep your heart folded in an Indian blanket. Am I too old to leap into the unknown, to grieve? I have given up the ghost of rhyme. I have given up the ghost of time, time that pares back my nails. I hide inside an onion house. Little windows dot my skin. Light paints a picture of your soul within. You tell me who I am. I know who I am. I am emptiness. Emptiness. This is another poem from Honoring Elders. And in this book, I try to honor as many relatives as I can, aunties, uncles, grandmas, grandpas, and so on. So it's Auntie's Dream, and it's not a particular auntie. It's just any indigenous auntie you care to think of. Auntie's Dream. How many doors keep opening and closing? How many? Until whirling petals of a dream unfold in a meadow. No one knows anything about darkness. At least that's what I've been told. Wrinkled flames, hibiscus flowers, autumn, 108 names for fallen leaves, and for the names of the divine ones. Leaves scattering, sweetgrass smoke everywhere, a disappearing act for people that call themselves sorcerer folk. No matter what you think, alphabets carry the message of the departure of Canadian geese. Space, timeless space. Where am I in this dream? I can't even find my hands or find my feet. We all need bodies for protection from ourselves. I can commit to memory some of my poems, but I don't remember most of my poems. But I remember one that I recall to mind because of the backdrop here. There is no moon. And the first poem I ever wrote when I was a tiny tot was the moon. The moon magnetizes me as she does the speckled sea. That was the name of that poem. But this poem is about Unio. And Unio appeared one afternoon in a Chinese playground. And I love to wander in Chinese playgrounds and Chinese quarters, in every ethnic neighborhood you can think of. You'll find me wandering there. And this was called Unio because the boy in the Chinese playground told me his name was Unio. And after all these years, I wonder, is his name really Unio? Or was his name really Unio? And did he really exist? So this is a story, a talk story poem. I decided to go wander in a Chinese playground for several days. I found an abandoned swing set and some monkey bars. And I lay down in the playground. Suddenly, a young boy showed up. "What's your name?" I asked. "Unio," he said. "I'm one of 14 children, and I'm 14 years old." I was 10. "Do you really have 14 brothers and sisters?" I asked him. "Well, 10, he said. He said, "I want you to place your head in my hands, just for a moment." I said, "Why should I do that?" He said, "Well, just try it and see what happens." So I placed my head in his hands. I have no idea to this day why I trusted him. The minute I placed my head in his hands, I sunk into a deep sleep from which I thought I would never awake. But that's not true. I'm lying. I had no thought, and I didn't even care if I would ever awake, because I had no thought. In the morning, and I did wake up to write this poem, Unio handed me a white cat. I kept the cat with me for 3 weeks. An old man I saw later in the playground said, do you think your cat likes cherries?" And he handed me a bag filled with cherries. I fed the white cat cherries for weeks thereafter. I'd never seen a cat eat cherries. Have you? Now, this book here has an interesting history because I called it Stonehenge Blues. I really didn't want to call it Stonehenge Blues, but I didn't know what to do. It was a coming-of-age novel. And when I say novel, every single story in this book is completely fictional. And I want everyone in the studio audience to know that. And this one is a fantasy about a night in the castle. And in this book, I write letters to my mom or to my dad about all the wonderful things that happen in the coming-of-age novel. Because both parents are by now departed. I'm 70 years old. So that's how it is right now. A Night in the Castle. This is another talk story poem. That means it's probably written in prose, but if you were a poet, you would think it was poetry. Dear Mom, or should I call you Moth? You always sign your letters half of a mother. Moth, you call yourself. So I'll call you the same. Dear Moth, half of a mother. I spent the night in a castle last night. It looks like the tourists all left. We all had to leave the castle in a hurry, didn't we, when the Germans came? But on the other hand, I'd like to tell you about this Irish castle. This lady came up to me on the street when I was wandering in Ireland, and she said, I have a castle and I want to give it to you to spend some time in, because that will teach you some horse sense that will come to you if you're in one place long enough. When the key turned in the lock and I entered the castle, I felt totally safe. When I was young, about 5 years old, I remember looking out of a castle and seeing mountains and pine trees. Across the street was Carly Lombardo. Her family was Italian. Her father played the hurdy-gurdy. The whole family played music. There were 3 girls and 2 parents, and they played every night. I thought this must be what a real family is. And the mirror of the pine trees, the mirror that is the pine trees, said, "Don't take your eyes off me for a second." And my mother said, "Don't talk about your great aunt like that. She really can't help it that her hair turned white at 20, that she wears white gloves even at breakfast. You know, she doesn't want anyone to see the true nature of her hands. They are covered with eczema." There's a fantasy about meeting a fortune teller in a park, and she was sharing an ice cream cone with her daughter in the park. And this poem is another one from Stonehenge Blues, which really could have been a Stonehenge comedy for all that. And this poem is called "Want to See God?" The fortune teller is sharing an ice cream cone with her daughter. She gives the ice cream cone to her daughter, Fuzia, and then she points to her eyes. "Fuzia, you know you have lovely eyes." Her daughter giggles and looks away. "I will tell your fortune," the mother says. "You really will? You really will? My fortune?" I ask. Suddenly she takes the ice cream cone away from her daughter and smashes it into my lifeline. "You want to see God?" she asks. "You want to see God?" she asks. This is another talk story from Stonehenge Blues, and you know the secret about Stonehenge is that orchestra conductors come to the Druidic landmark and they bang on these stones, and they found out they were hollow, and that underneath Stonehenge there's a whole nother archaeological find. There's a whole nother Stonehenge under this one. And it has elements of the dreamlike aspects in it, which is why I think I chose this title. But again, it's just a Druidic monument, an excuse for a talk story. Little Relics. This tells the story of when the protagonist, Pumpkin, her name was, walks into a subway or a tube station, and she goes in the turnstile. In the old days they had turnstiles, and at the moment she goes through the turnstile she meets an orchestra conductor, and this story is told in Stonehenge Blues, and this is called Little Relics. And this is at the point in the talk story where the conductor meets Maria, who says she works at the airport but only on the ground. And we follow her up together to her apartment, and she tells a story that makes him act as if he could never be an orchestra conductor. And so this story is called Little Relics. This orchestra conductor was somehow different. He never deviated from utter gentility and a sense of nobility. He could never tell a lie about any situation in his life. Once he met Maria, it felt as if he'd known this Broadway shaman woman of Broadway tunes all his life. When we arrived at her place in Queens on the 10-story walk-up, we sat down and had grape juice and crackers. She said, "I want you to know what I do offset. Besides working in the airport, I sell these little relics." And she showed me what was on her dresser. It was a canary sitting on a rose in a cage made with 2 strawberry baskets, the kind you get at the local market. Suddenly, the orchestra conductor changed. He became very emotional. It seemed totally out of character. He'd always been very supportive during the whole trip to Queens on the subway. I thought, this is the kind of man who would lay down his life for either one of us at a moment's notice. Suddenly, though, when he saw the canary in the green strawberry cage, he said, "I can't take this gift. I can't accept this gift. I really can't. I have an aunt who's over 88 years old, and she wouldn't know how to take it. She really wouldn't know how to take it. She once had a canary who was called Caruso. Whenever she went shopping at the marketplace, she put Caruso in her back pocket, and he always sang for her, and for her alone." And that story is called Little Relics, sold on behalf of Caruso. This poem is about a funeral urn. And have you ever noticed how when someone passes, people take ashes and they lock up those ashes in a beautiful locket held to the heart, or they leave the ashes on a mantelpiece as a family heirloom, and the family heirloom gets stuck there somehow. And this poem was really exploring the nature of what an urn really means. Have you seen that antique urn set high upon a mantelpiece? What for? What is it doing there exactly? If ashes in the urn are dead to the world and to the Ganges, why venerate this vase? If saints have loved prison cells as much as this, your last words could be mirrored in a spiritual message we could hold next to the heart. Here's one message I heard. Some of us have lived too long, but not me. Harnessed by an ocean's untrammeled tide, why pose as a natural bride of winter's beggared branches? As grief surrenders and gives way to grief, what's left? What of a poet's life bereft? How can a stone-cold heart contain the nature of enclosure? If called upon to save yourself from yourself, you tell the executioner, the death card, I can't. I did this life as I was told. I had no chance, no choice. I grew old. How could I undo what had been done by cowards' bravado? If an embroidered peasant blouse carries a Rasputin's curse, perhaps my vision is only a figment of someone else's imagination. Sun. This poem is to do with the same as the last poem, but it looks at it a little bit in a different way. And I thought I'd read it because you can always look at death as a beginning of something new, and you can always look at autumn as what becomes before another season. So it's always up to you to do what you're not told to do, but to think whatever thought you never thought of before. So that's my idea of poetry, is a curtsy to the imagination and a prayerful incantation before meditation loses its rhyme and its fervor and its nurturing essence, which we're all capable of, but we no longer have time. We no longer have time to even appreciate the seasons. Sun, if ashes have nothing to do with the dead, what of the living body's form? Instead, accept blessings wherever they fall, unmask the casket, decorate it with prayer banners. I'm told the sun is the only thing that matters. When spirit banishes itself from the narrow bone of ocean's wrinkled earth and corridor, can you imagine wreaths being returned to the mourners? With or without elegies, why succumb to death's mourners? What do you expect to find when truth cuts ways in Elysium's wine-filled fallow fields, and you are left a slave? This is called the domino effect, otherwise known as the house of cards. And I wrote this poem because you always hear people in conversation saying, it's someone's fault. Something should be done about this. The universe is out of kilter. And they seek to redress grievances by growing hot under the collar and blaming it on group karma. Domino effect, or house of cards. Blame it on group karma. Blame it on the numberless members of the soul's harem. Blame it on the dwindling tax dollars, yours, mine, and everyone else's. Blame it on the nature of political events. Blame it on white-collar crime or heartburn. Blame it on goose quills of wisdom's fearful winged birds. Blame it on dolphins who hung in arabesques in skillful oceans, Byzantine nonetheless. Blame it on mid-air collision of waves. Why don't you subtract logic from a swallow's itinerant wing? Or note a sparrow's love for breadcrumbs. Blame everything on cosmic breadcrumbs. Devoid of any meaning, love's emptiness impersonating itself. Or blame it on the fox that looks back into my eyes and blames absolutely no one at sunrise. All right, this is from meditation, and this book came out of a heron that sat on my car for a long time, so I thought I should honor him by writing this poem. Variations on a heron. And remember, this heron is a heron that refuses to fly anywhere, just stays. Like a Jungian shadow, it stays. O inconsolable heron, although you are most silent, flying before the uncertain fire of water lilies, why do I hear you weeping in water, almost with a human cry, before the shimmering rafters of glimmering water endlessly rippling, gliding over turquoise welter of unspeakable cries, still flying skyward, weeping, sighing. How can you dive speechless into portals of air before the undying winds of change? Where are you going, spiraling into broken circles? Why perform one of your death-defying free falls, making no reply? And this poem is called Mystic Rain, but it really was called Books Dressed in Rags. I like to think of books as people and the authors come across in certain ways, glad rags or not so glad. And so that's why I wrote this poem based on that idea. Each time I take a book back to the library, I find the most valuable and vulnerable pages rudely torn away. Though dressed in rags, isn't every page as valuable as the next? As inner rose to outer seeking thorn? I'm vexed that every page is often torn, as wheel to chariot's pilgrimage, delayed and stopped by immortality or time. If no one can deny presence or absence, fails bring some deliberate harm. The sudden heist and blast of wisdom, by whom is it adored? Before what altar? For whom that hidden message sent that love itself cannot restore? No matter what each day, as I go about picking figs and apricots, men with shovels arrive and bandanas to dig everything up. Almost every tree is uprooted these days. Haven't you noticed? Such blasphemy, until the street is littered with uprooted stores of what might have transpired, had not a suitor interrupted the story's furor and outrage and terror with muted wonder. Each time I change the bed sheets and the pillow, I wonder, is godliness what I lack? Is cleanliness? Is it true the writing of 100 poems falls short somehow? What could ever melt my heart? Today you waited in a restaurant for someone else to appear. You announced that person might set you free, my dear, to wander the hemisphere forever. But later everything changed. Instead, an angelic presence came and sat and prayed and wept at the table with you. And after tears were shed and exchanged, just between you and your angel, you announced, nothing I could do or say will ever change what happened in the world. And your lover upped and went. Is that why you got up and suddenly walked away? Since the rain had arrowed down upon the roof of sound and pounded half the night, you told me the sound of falling rain. Isn't that the cause of bitter blame? Isn't that the cause of bitter blame? The art of swimming is about the sort of existential meeting between two people and having the feeling that you're being on camera, but you're not. You're just meeting a person. And so it's kind of like the art of total recall. But if you had total recall about all your past lives and all your future lives, you wouldn't know how to swim. And I know my father threw me in the water when I was like 3 or 4 years old, and I swam. And he says, don't you want to get out of the water? And I said, no, I'm a water spirit, I'm happy there. And so it's really about the happiness of being able to swim, and at the same time, the indecipherable aspect of life, that we're all swimming in life together, all in the same non-boat together. This is the art of swimming. We had never met at any time before, yet hidden behind my shoulder, you were standing all the time watching over. I know it. You were preparing to open a camera shutter, aiming at that camera at my inner retina, widening its vast expanse as my pupil went on swimming into a field of shimmering stars. Already flying overhead, did birds seize the moment to soar heavenward or somewhere else? At least the way I recall the story, the place where I was standing was on Broadway and 14th Street, and I looked really cool in my new black boots, wearing my new suede tan miniskirt. But I wasn't in cahoots with anyone. As I was standing there doing nothing, perhaps I was thinking of what might happen, but probably I was thinking of doing nothing later on during the day. I may have wondered what impact this memory would have on the nature of my poetic digestion and the connective threads of my tubal ligature. I'll read a closing section from Shaman Dreaming, and this book was really one book, and it ended up being Pavlova Awakening and Shaman Dreaming, but it was supposed to be in the same volume. So, and all these poems were written in Boulder. And I think this little section on meeting here is a continuation of that previous poem I just read. And what I keep noticing, when you write this many books, you don't remember any single poem as being outstanding, because a lot of people say, well, is there one poem you like more than another? And I said, absolutely not. I continue writing the poem as it's given to me from one book to another, and they kind of are interwoven somehow. So this is Meeting. Where was it I met you? Haven't I met you before? Didn't we meet in Ennistimon or in Sligo or in Glen Columkill? Was it on account of moon-driven tides or horse-drawn buggies that I made us collide in County Fermanagh? Shell-shocked, why must I hide for weeks inside my Russian hermitage cottage? Was it because of solar flares that we missed each other? Dare me, I really can't decide. Destined to become soulmates at the Russian Bear restaurant, why did I keep missing you by several blocks at a time? Didn't I do exactly as the dream instructed? Then I heard a message-bearing spirit guides murmuring, the psychic hotline is shut down. Maybe I should have taken these words more seriously, but I didn't at the time. Practicing the power of creative intention without the benefit of a laser, I wondered why that boat capsized on the lake. Later, in a state of despair, I fled straight away to Dakar and then to Dublin. Later, when I called for a doctor to remove bits of shrapnel from my hair, no one would come to my assistance. In fact, my imagination was left dangling mid-air. Each day, I did something to memorize the details of a new text. My body wanted comforting. However, my soul was already astral traveling out the window. No fair. Only after hearing the sound of a hammered dulcimer played by a bearded vizier did my body fight its way back to earth, trying to explain to the tavern keeper what was happening. But it didn't do any good. Instead, the crowd ignored the truth. Heavily editing what happened next, I noted 2 deer sat down in the back garden at the mountain resort of Poco de Diablo. For the next 3 days, they simply refused to disappear. As I lay under a glittering canopy of cold stars, how do you figure? I began to think none of my friends would ever come back. Was I married? Was I single? Did this make any difference? What can I tell you? Recovering from the withering effects of what seemed to be one of those Walpurgis nights, I reflected on what had happened on the island of Montserrat. After that volcano blew, whatever government officials were left failed to make proper amends. Everyone and his brother were invited to leave their carefully tended acreage and relocate. And those who refused to leave, they were left waiting pretty much in limbo. Incredulous and stupefied, the natives watched their hopes go up in smoke, and flaming embers bore down on all they had ever known. Never mind on my part. You know what? I've got this life all figured out. Okay, this is about prognostication in the sense of weather. You know, a lot of people read the clouds and they read the weather to find out what's happening in the temperament of characters of the universe. And I always think of the old scribes writing down everything that was ever thought of by the bearded viziers and somehow knowing the character and disposition of the universe because of it, before there were weather forecasters and so on. So this is called Weather, but it's a poem about prognostication. In a voice barely above a whisper, Grandma asks Sarah, "How can you say what you said to me? How can you tell me the clouds are behaving differently this year? They seem to belong to a different country, to a different time and place. It's scary. I braid your hair and recite a good many of the chants I remember from my grandfather. They always did have power, and this is good. But last Sunday, when we were praying to the north wind in the church, a preacher told us nothing we had done had brought misfortune to our lands. And I know what he said was true because he was a preacher, and my grandma was his translator. But then, when I turned my head away from Sarah and looked at the dry clay of Mother Earth, I saw the preacher was weeping as he spoke, and I admitted what he said. The preacher said he did that, he did say that, he did that. He said the government did it. The government, he said, was looking into this very deeply to find ways to take away the drought from the land, to find ways to take away the plutonium. Too many rain dancers had left town for other parts. Perhaps they emigrated into foreign lands. He said the government was choosing certain kinds of chemicals, and they were finding out what they were and what they were going to do about us. And then the preacher looked at the sky, and they wanted to make the sky look different than it is. And then, as I looked at you, my granddaughter, I told you, you have an education. You know a certain way of doing things. And then I rubbed my hands together, and then I said, they think of so many ways to make the sky look different, as if the clouds were drowning in blood. But it is already gray and dark, It doesn't rain anymore the way it did in the old days. You know what everyone says. They're trying to take the story down, the story of the wind that takes us down, the story of the sun, and make it frowned and make the earth emergent stories happening, not happening to us anymore. They want to get into fixing the elements and make everything different than it is. And we really can't question as to why they do that. I know if my grandmother was alive, she would say nothing. A wind blows through her body and her ragged scarf ripples. Hasn't it always been like that since a long time ago? I mean about the wind. And then she makes this little noise in her throat and she mutters under her breath. And then she makes that little rasping sound like a bird. And then she says, well, whatever happens, it's not so good somehow. And then she says, the lean moon tilts over the earth. And then she says, awakening, everything spills out of the moon. It's a new kind of death before time ever talked back to you in the womb. I have a poem here from My Feet Talk to the Road, and this collection involved a series of characters who frequented Gardenia's cafe. And they would go there to get together and draw tarot cards. And I wrote a poem for every tarot card that anyone frequenting Gardenia's cafe might need or want. This card is the Empress card. And I want you to note that none of the poems have anything to do with the cards at all. But then again, they do. The Empress card. Coming out of the kitchen one evening at 6 o'clock, I heard my husband singing. I asked him, why have you come in a dream of water that is not water? What does it matter in a dream of timeless time? You don't rhyme anymore. Coming out of the kitchen that has no cellar, I asked, why have you come in? Who opened the door for you? Now it is August. How shall I feed the children? Do you hear them crying out in unison, broccoli, broccoli, while skinny corn stalks fret in the garden of sorrow and regret? Why are you still one who is unmet? Coming out of the kitchen, I questioned. I asked my husband, how shall I now sit down to table when the jug of wine cracks its jewels to milk? There are no words. This time, there are no words, no cause for rhyming on corn silk. To him I say, of nothing am I truly certain. If what is yours, then what is mine is not mine. And then I strike out. I strike out for the full moon, and I drink a cup of wine alone. Now this card from the same collection is the Hierophant's card. And I remember, it's one of the few poems I remember So it probably was not channeled at all in any respect, and was in my log cabin over in Boulder, and people were throwing beer cans at the door constantly because they were on leave from Rocky Flats or something like that, and they were celebrating. And I just was in my log cabin listening to the beer cans hit the door and feeling, what am I looking for in life? What is the Hierophant card, which is a seeker's card, really about? So I do remember the circumstances of this poem, probably just because of the beer cans hitting that door so hard while I was trying to channel poetry. So this is the art of a non-channeled poem. The Hierophant. O orphaned light that has no home, O faceless driven ocean without imagined form or sound, O nameless reverie of dream profound, time summoning ancient doors, opening and closing before blue whirling stars stayed within orbital rounds, before an altar whose prayer wheels move, still singing, still whirring, turning, and rekindling unerring ghosts of spiritual fire and flame. O orphan light that does not have a home, eyeless stammering within time's watery threads, mysterious rhyming, unerring guise without shape or supernatural form. Whence have you come? How is it you are here, catching at the frail hem of some supple garments worn, yet never frayed? O beginning light of eternal flame, why is it that you burn, unending those russet dancing flames, anchoring and bending yet to earth's brim, flickering in the wake of unlit waves that warm and harvest salt? Look upon the muted embers falling into meteor showers, moving and unmoving, becoming unrepentant flames. Nameless, who is it, surrenders at the hem of your sacred garment? If in half-remembered dreams, unfathomed and non-mirrored, you come, if moving within a God-forsaken way, furrow-riven, taken to task, by moon-illumined promises combed from a nether world, if seer you dare to drive out madness, blessed or accursed, expect the worst and best to follow, rehearsed and unrehearsed. If murmuring among nameless oceans, the great goddess truly does exist, if within branches of darkened infinity, wind-driven by those who cannot see, in a perfume that cannot distinguish beak from bird, leaf from tree, unless those words surround the heart, bark, fruit, stem, and bowl of tree, mercifully and unmercifully, images will die, will lose trajectory in every soul ocean, seated in ceaseless rounds of last breath, first breath, non-breathing rounds of sound. That is unless. This is another poem from this My Feet Talk to the Road collection. And the circumstances of this poem, again, was a little different because I was pretty much stranded in Ireland for a long time. And so I kept adding one line a day. So you'll know how many days I was in Ireland for by the length of this poem, which is exactly one page. So I just wrote one line a day. And I think it's informed by a sort of Irish Celtic aspect that I don't usually succumb to. But I was very much taken with the Celtic aspects at that time. And what had happened was I used to eat in a vegetarian restaurant in Ireland, and I came back one day and they told me Martin had died, and I didn't know him. But the people in the restaurant decided that I did know him. So I pretended that I knew him and wrote this poem. And so this was the death card, and it's called The Lament of the Sparrows for Martin, an unknown. Were you to declare every blade of grass as a sacrament leading to a graveside in Collooney, or is it Cobb, or is it Galway, an eaglet landing on a branch might seem nothing but a lightning flash polishing a soul's blank sky mirror. How is it a human life can be snuffed out? How is it a human life should be lived or could be lived, that eyes might envision themselves as yet they think they are, clear-sighted, that eyes might be able to unhook palaces of air so as to never find themselves bedeviled by darkness or defiled by a dark purse of unknowing flesh. Martin, who are you? Where are you now? I long for you, though I never knew you. A river's tongueless longing and notion of light is always changing. When a peddler sinks his boat into a Ganges sinkhole, mud-filled, I go, I run, I study canaries in a cave to see whether breath is a part of the infinite stem of belonging or not, or something else that mattered. A lover may not always be a trusting friend, but instead may prove herself, himself, as an innocent ghost who at least only stirs the pot at the beginning, yet at the end reveals the plight of the illogical thorn curling beneath the petals of a rose. Within trappings of human attachment and thirst, what is it seems beguiling, least of all to those in the wheel of life who have the will to live and not succumb to the lament of sparrows for Martin, the unknown. This is a very recent volume. The other poems I've been reading were written within the last couple of years. And this is a very recent book that I put out last month. I kept meeting people at fairs who said, when is the shaman's lunch going to take place? And I really didn't know what they were talking about. So I went to a cafe and wrote all these poems in San Francisco, and I thought, this will be a shaman's lunch volume. And it's a spoof on all those people who think they're shamans. And they're very serious shamans that existed in many centuries past and still exist in the Siberian wilderness, in tundra that is totally unlivable, that is so cold. And anyway, this is not to be taken seriously, although there are serious love poems I wrote in the San Francisco cafe. In the back, you can sort of see the atmosphere of the cafe. This poem is called At Long Last Beauty's Roses Had Faded. Finally, after all this time, he told me he loved me, But then suddenly he looked away. Sod it. He'd been lying all the time. In the fortnight that I knew him, if even judge and jury had not persisted in rhyming at when greening wave pared back, racked from ocean's floor, in the way of a moon's comb allowing sorrow's nave, why affirm the night sky might dissolve in metaphor and tears? If only things could have turned out differently, let's say I'd be on a different path, then ever so quietly close the kitchen door that day as a sometime student among several of the hallowed four directions, some of which Sufi elders and Zoroastrianism, in all honesty, would never deign to follow. Yeah. He admitted he finally renounced the lot of every spiritual path. He said, for lack of light, he even turned his back on angels. So this one is in the same kind of ironic tone from the same collection, and it's a coyote poem. And the things that happen in Sedona never happen in San Francisco. In Sedona, you can go into a cafe and hear two people arguing intensely about whether they saw a javelina or a coyote. And they'll talk about this for hours. What was it I saw? Did I see a brown bear or a moose or a deer or an elk? This would never happen in San Francisco, but when I was in San Francisco, I wrote this coyote poem about Arizona. What do you do when you hear coyote yapping against the blurred blue light of crooked stars? A faker, a dervish, could not stir awake. Who could ever end this argument? Stiff-quilled in the way of a porcupine, is that what you saw? A creature stumbling on the hill, coyote's silvered gray hair, the lesser star cannot seem to shake. From thickets where numberless crickets are, in a fugitive field, look on the rocks. There are petroglyphs, sundials, and directions to lost cities. Fables of lost dogs still whine in the outback, in the mudslide-filled arroyo, remaining unshaken. The tilt of cottonwood, pinon, and the uneasy rock surfaces. Why do we set our teeth against the wilderness of stones and the broken fables of sleep that elude us, reaching home? This is another poem from a very, very non-serious poem. And I think poets probably want to aim for humor or irony and changes of voice and tone. So you can take this poem very seriously or not. But I think all the poems in Shaman's Lunch are not serious. I know that a sketch that was done in that cafe involved a photographer taking a picture of himself slumping across a table and then doing a sketch of it. There are nice illustrations in this book, and it does make a difference. Here's little room left in this body for wine, and it's really a pastiche on the Shaman's Lunch. So if you overindulge in shamanic activity, you could find yourself slumped across a table like this. Another section is called, One Day I Noticed the Menu Had Changed, and there's a whole lot of knives and forks in there. And the other one was The Bride Wants French Toast. I have all these different And this poem is about Angel Gonzalez. And Angel Gonzalez, again, is an unknown person. He's just a character. What are you about, Angel Gonzalez? I don't get who you are. Do you get who you are? Once I heard a gypsy at a symposium for castanet players declare, "Tonight I'll sing until I grow hoarse and old. On no account will anyone insult my voice. Not even the flamboyant onlookers without visas from Granada. Most of them remain clueless anyway, out of choice, preaching about gods and Jesus, and they're old school. You know, they talk about angels. How many fingers have caused the mandolin guitar strings to break in the middle of a performance? Whoever dances for pesetas on a dance floor until flamenco soul wings melt down the tallow wicks of candles? Who do you know like this? Do you even know in Treblinka what happened? The ovens, and how the gypsies danced without the momentary weddings of souls to flesh, surrendered all too quickly in the wicker fires flickering with innocence. Extreme unction. And this poem comes from the Shaman Lunchtime Cafe, and it's about the old grandmothers that come from the old country, and they come from so far back. We don't even know their names, some of them. But I'm sure many of the shamans today who follow Shamans Magazine won't agree with me on this. Extreme unction. In the beginning were the grandmothers, and grandmother, I forget her real name. Perhaps Sadie is to blame for this omission of a real deal on genealogy. Though she was from the old country, I believe she was one rather hard of hearing. Was she secluded? Did she move into a kind of self-willed exile from the possible kindness of existing relatives? All the while, it seemed she saw fit to argue, and yet argue in such a way without demeaning anyone or incurring the disfavor of the gods she worshipped. How she argued, what she believed in, what she argued for, I'm not quite sure what it was all about just now, but it might have been concerning where a horsehair pillow or a sofa might be aptly placed in a room, or whether papers should be hidden in bureau drawers or left in an attic for rodents to gnaw. I imagine she was the one who did or did not agree to show up at any one of several possible burial sites of my mother. In fact, she might have agreed to show up at the wrong funeral parlor. About her own grave, she demanded a most unnatural and wild adornment of heathen flowers, as if primroses were flowers to be forgiven for habitual proverbs and endless platitudes of deceit and betrayal. Though I wanted to believe in her, she chose to live as close to earth as anyone, and when it came to my mother's memory, I really was not sure of anything. I only knew her bracelet and several amulets showed up on my grandmother's arm one day. Simone was the one who had never known her. Simone was the only one that was left to pray. This is another poem from Shaman's Lunch, And one of the things shamans like to do, if they're real shamans or if they think they're real shamans, is impersonate words. So one word can stand in for another word. And that's what I tried to do with this poem. I said, what if one word could stand for another word? Would it still work? Would it still mean the same thing? And how interchangeable is the coinage of words? So that's what I did with this poem. It's a nonsense poem, it's a charm poem. And the reason I call it a charm poem is like a charm bracelet. And kids in my day, back in the 40s, used to collect charm bracelets. And they'd have these little charms, and one after another, maybe a tiny chariot or a fish or anything would show up in this charm bracelet. And people tried to have as many different charms as possible. So I began thinking, what if each charm on the charm bracelet were a word? This is called Wind, My Name is Tree. Wind, my name is tree, dancing in a wind-driven storm, a place of peace in kingdoms of the unknown form. No one has ever seen. Wind, are you peach tree blossom, singing of weather that soothes the mind and spirits of mankind? Wind, my name is tree, dancing in a wind-driven storm. Love, my heart is love, singing both inside and outside of my body. Mother, Father, rain, you are my heart once more, transparent, singing and bringing rain once more, and walking through walls from drumbeats of a wind unseen and unheard by any. Who rides the untamed wind? Wind, my name is tree, dancing in a wind-driven storm. Wind, are you she? And he, and the many spirits who in a heartbeat are she and they who bring forth rain to see the world drenched by many rooted worlds of waters in unheard and unsung oceans that are free. Wind, my name is tree, dancing in a wind-driven storm, a place of peace in kingdoms of the unknown. Rain, you are rosewater, reaching down from the sky once more. Heart, are you singing inside my skin with the small maps of water, belonging to me and yet not being me, and being you, and being both reflections of you and me as iridescent entities whispering of each other. Even mirrors cannot comprehend in darkness or in light. Wind, my name is tree, dancing in a wind-driven storm, a place of peace and kingdoms of the unknown and unborn.